5 minutes until showtime. 4 minutes until showtime. 3 minutes until showtime. 2 minutes until showtime.
Okay, sister, go ahead and give a sound test.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
All right, looks good on my end. How's looking on you guys on Twitter? Let me know in the chat, please. Putting this all out on social media is such a hassle because you have to go to each and every individual platform, and they all have their own unique way of taking the content.
Of course they do.
And it's just like it's like I think I can do it in 5 minutes, and it's like it takes forever. It shouldn't take this long to do this.
I know.
It really is frustrating.
1 minute until showtime.
Just enough time for another bite of fry bread.
All right, I'm going to mute you here. I think everything's looking good here. Easier to hear tonight. Everyone says the sound is great, so we're good.
All right.
All right, stand by.
Mm-hmm.
Your show will go live in 5 seconds. 4, 3, 2, 1. Blog Talk Radio.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Wherever you are out there across the world, welcome to a brand new edition of Vestiges After Dark. I'm your host, Bishop Bryan Ouellette, coming to you live from the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains on this March 16th, 2021. And tonight we've got Open Lines Part 4. We continue our new platform into this new episode, and hopefully we'll get some good calls tonight. The quality of this show is up to you, so if you want to call in with a question about religion, metaphysics, paranormal question, or even just a comment or story, we'll take it. If you want to talk about something that's very mundane, we'll talk about that too. It's your show. That's what this is all about. Give us a call, 516-453-0138. That's 516-453-0138. We'll be taking calls in the order we receive them. Don't go away. Everyone is having a wonderful evening tonight. Once again, I am your host, Bishop Bryan Ouellette, and this is a brand new episode of Vestiges After Dark, Open Lines, Part 4. I hope you had a good day. I did. I am finally starting to really, truly feel better from my horrible sinus infection that I had over the past few weeks. It's one of the worst ones I've ever had, and you know, it really just takes away from every aspect of your life. And, you know, I love food. Most of you who follow me know that I love food and I love good drink. And I haven't really been able to enjoy those things to the same degree because, you know, when you can't properly smell or taste things and you've got all this congestion and pressure in your nose, and, of course, I'm prone to migraines. So it tends to cause headaches, too. It's a miserable thing, and the allergies here in Georgia are the absolute worst. So if you are a person who's prone to seasonal allergies, just stay away from the state. I mean, there's a lot of them that you need to stay away from, but I'm telling you, I mean, I've lived all over this country, and I would say that this is about equal to, if not worse than, New England. And New England, I thought, was the worst for hay fever. It's actually, I think it's just as bad here in Georgia. And it's even more than just seasonal. It's not just the spring. You know, in New England, it seemed to only be the spring where I would have these bad allergies. But in New England, you know, here in Georgia, it seems to be, it's like 2 or 3 times a year. It's like there's a spring version, there's a fall version, and then there's a winter version. Who gets allergies in the winter? But here in Georgia, you do. It's ridiculous. So all I can say is, you know, I prefer the West Coast. The climate out there, much, much, much better. I never had allergies like this in Vegas. When I lived in Vegas, we had it was 2 weeks of the year, the olive trees would bloom, and that would wreak havoc. But other than that, it was fine. And usually usually Zyrtec is all I need to take. But right now I've been having to take Zyrtec and Flonase to keep this under control. I think I'm starting to sound a little bit normal again. So that's a good thing, particularly for the work that I do. I don't like to sound like this big congested mess when I come on the air. But anyway, I'm happy. I hope you're happy. So Sister Mary Joan is here with us tonight. How are you doing tonight, Sister?
Good evening, everyone. I'm doing just fine. Nice little chilly, rainy night in Atlanta.
You know, it's
I've got the
perfect day out there.
Got the blankie on and the kitty's asleep.
I like it when it's like chilly, but not hot. You know, not warm, not to the point where it's like too warm. But I like it a little bit chilly. I don't like it freezing cold, obviously, but you know, it's a little bit chilly and it's wet and rainy and nice, thick overcast. That's like my ideal weather for me. I really enjoy it. And actually the allergies are better when it's wet out there, so keeps all that pollen down to the ground where it belongs.
Yeah, I've got the window in my bedroom open to get some fresh air in here, so it's crisp, but it's nice with the hoodie on.
Yeah, it's actually not too bad out there today, not too bad, and it's been a few days here in Georgia of warm weather. In fact, a couple days ago it was hot. It reached actually 83.
We got spoiled.
Yeah, we did get spoiled a little bit, little taste of. Well, I think it was Colorado that had a snowstorm. We were having 83, you know.
Yeah, they call this false spring in Georgia.
Yeah.
It happens every year.
Every year, absolutely. Oh, my goodness. So those of you who would like to call into the show, the number to call is 516-453-0138. That's 516-453-0138. I'll repeat that throughout the broadcast, but call in now. And we will be taking your calls in the order that we receive them. Don't hang up because you'll lose your place. Okay, so if you have a paranormal question, an esoteric question, a religious question, or any kind of question, any kind of comment, we'd love to hear from you. You know, this is what this show's all about. It's a new platform for Vestiges After Dark. Rather than just hear me talk about some subject, I want to hear what you have to say. And you always have questions for me on social media. So here's your opportunity to call me now, and we can talk in real time on the air and see what we can do to help you through a paranormal issue, or maybe even, you know, give you some direction, and or if you have some questions or comments for me. We are always open to listening to what you have to say. I really do very much appreciate all of the people that follow me on social media. I hate social media, but I really do love all of you. I really do. It's just social media that I can't stand. So, you know, if you're a Twitter person, I appreciate the fact that you follow me on Twitter. And, you know, this is one way that I can give back to all of you. You know, before we start going to calls, and I want to give people a chance to call in. Again, that number is 516-453-0138, 516-453-0138. And there's a few things in the news that I wanted to talk about today before we get into the show. I always like to start off with some, I guess you could say, a preface to everything that we ended up talking about. I try to find things that are relevant to the subject matter of this show. And there was a couple things that stood out. One was, and this is something that I think, Sister Mary Joan, you could probably give some insight into because of you've had a similar experience in this.
Okay.
But it was a person talking about what it's like to be in a coma, and she was in a medically induced coma for, I think she said, 16 days, and the way she described it was pure hell. apparently she reports that she was able to actually feel everything that went on. So when they did surgery, she could feel the scalpel literally tearing away each strand of flesh from whatever it is they were operating on. And she also remembers hearing people talking to her, but she said it would enter into sort of like this permanent nightmare state where even though she was able to perceive certain things that were going on in the world around her, she was also sort of integrating, or her brain was integrating those experiences into something that could make sense of by creating a nightmarish storyline. And so she had dreamt that North Korea blew up the moon and that someone assassinated Obama. There was all these other delusional types of, or delirious, I shouldn't say delusion, it was more like delirium. These horrific things that she would experience through this. And even her husband, who was there by her side this entire time, she would get these delirious thoughts that he was cheating on her, that he went out and found another woman while she was stuck in the hospital. And of course, none of these things happened or were true, but it became this permanent nightmare state that she described. And so she found being in a coma to be an absolutely horrific experience. And it certainly made me reflect back on some of the things that I've taught about the initial stages of death, which I would say, I don't really talk too much about comas, but since this came up, I thought it would be a good launching point for today's show. I would say that there's definitely a correlation between the coma state that people report and those initial stages of death where a person is in that beginning state of fading away into, if it continues on, then it actually results in death. If it doesn't, then they kind of stay in this in-between state for a while, which is what you described. And I remember you telling, and you've told it on this show before, some of your experiences after your accident, and how you also had what seemed like magnificent hallucinations, they probably were not hallucinations. I think they were genuine spiritual experiences, but from the psychological vantage point, that's how they would be described medically. But you'd have these encounters and you'd witness things and you'd see things that were in some cases quite horrifying. And I have said before that for those who approach death unprepared, death can be an exceptionally horrifying experience. The afterlife condition can be an exceptionally horrifying experiences for those who are not prepared and are not ready, have not done the work that needs to be done in order to actually prepare oneself for those encounters, which is what every religion in the world is ultimately designed to do, and it's to prepare you for what comes next, because what comes next is a lot more not only real than what we know now. We think this is the real world. It's not the real world. It's a lot, it's really just a preparatory state for something that's far more advanced, more sophisticated, far more dangerous. And if we just waste our time here, then we actually die and are completely unprepared for what comes. So what would you say? I don't know. I don't remember if you said that you were in a coma or not. I know that you were fading in and out of consciousness several times. I know that you were remarkably awake through some of the things that you shouldn't have been. But did you actually qualify as being in a coma during your accident?
I was in a medical-induced coma for about a week.
Okay.
And I remember the last thing I remember before they put me on life flight was them trying to get my jacket off of me, and it was a thick leather Harley jacket, and they couldn't cut it off. So they're like, "We need to put you out." And I said, "I know." And then I said, "God, I'm in your hands." And then everything went black.
Mm.
And then the next thing I remember consciously, it was just basically nothing. And then my consciousness came back, and I could feel myself fighting with something. There was a point where I knew I was fighting something in a hospital room, and I had pulled a tube out of my throat and was fighting the staph.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember some nurse saying, "Here comes the blood, here comes the blood." And I don't know if that was the blood that was coming to me, because I needed 19 units of blood to bring me back because
Right.
I had lost so much. But then the next thing I remember was seeing and hearing my parents, who had to have come from Illinois, and they were in a waiting room. Now, I had no idea they were there, of course, because I was in a coma, but they had flown in since the accident, and I remember seeing them and hearing them in the other room, and then I remember what I could only akin to a Satan-type figure sitting in a corner in the room I was in, and him saying something to the effect of torture her, hurt her, make her feel it. And then I remember feeling what felt like the only thing I could compare it to was piranhas picking and pulling at my skin.
Yeah.
And at that point, I kind of knew I was in trouble because I could actually feel that.
Yeah.
And I remember saying that I was a child of Christ, and then I remembered saying, understanding, and during this time, understand, I was not going to church.
Right.
I had walked away from the organized church, and I was not Catholic by any means. But the patron saint of law enforcement is St. Michael. So when I tried to invoke Christ, and it seemed like nothing happened, so I remembered something inside me said, "You're a soldier, wake up," and I remembered St. Michael being the patron saint of law enforcement. And I remember audibly saying, "I am a soldier of St. Michael. You cannot have me." And then I swear to you, just a few seconds after that, it was like a bright light opened up ahead of me, and I felt like someone grabbed me and was pulling me up. And then I opened my eyes in the hospital, and I'm looking into the eyes of my very distraught mother.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd come back awake. And
Now, was
later
that a
on,
week
I learned
later?
that I had flat-
Did you
that
wake
was a
up?
week later.
So all of this now, what kind of
All-
time frame would you have guessed all that took place in while you were having it? Because we know
Somewhere
that it rationally
from
it was a
Saturday to
week.
Saturday. Yeah, Saturday to Saturday, I was out. They said that I had flatlined 3 times. I don't know the consecutiveness of that when it happened.
Right.
But that particular event that happened while I was under happened within a space of a week. Now, to me, when I woke up, they actually asked me, "Do you know what day it is?" Now, the accident happened on March 10th.
Right.
And it was March 17th. It was St. Patrick's Day when I woke up, if I remember correctly. And they asked me if I knew what day it was. And I said, "I don't know, maybe the 12th." And they're like, "No, honey, you've been out for a week." But
What did it
felt
feel like?
just a
What
few
time
minutes.
frame did it feel like while you were having these experiences? Like if you
Time
had to
was
put
kind
a
of
time on
irrelevant.
that.
That you can't. It's hard to describe because wherever I was, there was no time.
Did it feel
It
like
was just
but
like going from experience to experience.
did it feel like it, I mean, if you had to though say that it was longer or shorter than the 7 days that you were out, what would you say?
Shorter.
Shorter. Do you remember
Yeah.
any of the operation happening? Did you remember feeling
No, I only remember the part where I mentioned where I thought that I had pulled the tube out of my throat and that I was fighting staph,
Yeah.
and that apparently actually happened.
Oh, really?
That was told to me later on that I was actually fighting the staph when I tried to wake up during surgery.
Yeah.
When they were trying to put external fixators on my broken bones and stuff, and they said that I had knocked the glasses off of a nurse because I punched her with my broken arm. God love her. And so that actually happened.
Yeah.
But the other things, were basically when I was completely under. And I believe that it may have been during one of the times where I flatlined. I don't know how long I was flatlined. It kind of freaked me out when I learned that I'd flatlined 3 times.
Yeah.
And I said I didn't want to know anything else about that. So I don't know how long it took them to bring me back, but they were able to.
Interesting.
And so the time on the other side or in between, whatever you want to call it, the Bordeaux, as you said,
Bardo.
time doesn't really factor into it.
Yeah,
It's just an experience.
I'm fairly convinced that what people describe in these coma experiences are somewhat related to the non-corporeal aspect, or rather the spirit, as it's in that state of either detaching forever or being somewhat detached during the traumatic experiences, that whatever occurs during the body when a person is in a state that would cause there to be a risk of death. So I think it's related to that initial afterlife trial that Buddhism refers to as the Bardo, that in-between state, and of course all of the preparation that Buddhism puts into being able to successfully and skillfully succeed by transcending that state. Otherwise, one is consumed by it. And I think there's even parallels to this very clearly in Scripture for those that are part of the Christian worldview, where it's very clear that the nature of hell is more or less the natural aspect now. Not that it was originally designed to be that way, but that's the natural aspect of entropy now, that we would just simply be dissolved. And you were experiencing that as an entity that was actually sort of consuming you. In Buddhism, they're referred to as the wrathful Buddhas, which do that very thing. They actually eat you so that your ego can be removed enough that if you have enough skillfulness, then what remains can transcend the experience, and you're no longer bound to the attachment that keeps you stuck in that horrific, nightmarish state that can very quickly become hell for those of us who are not prepared. So it's an interesting insight. And when I was just reading about this person describing their coma, it just made me think how close that is to near-death experience, of course, of the negative variety. But there are people that often that report having very frightening experiences during comas, and even in nowhere near comparison to what you've went through or what this person went through. But I had a wisdom tooth removed many years ago, and the anesthesia that they gave me was not sufficient to put me out. And I remember waking up several times during the procedure. Of course, I was on a mixture of Demerol, and if you've ever been on Demerol, you don't have a cure in the world, and pain just does not matter to you because you don't feel it. In fact, all you feel is just absolutely euphoric. So even though I was waking up and I could definitely feel them digging in there and pulling out that tooth, and I could feel the struggle that came with it, it was almost like it was watching it as a third person. It really wasn't a direct experience. It was unique though. And anesthesia, I think, kind of puts you into a very similar kind of, almost like it sort of triggers certain death responses in your brain, and you get a little peek every now and then into maybe those first stages of death that are so mysterious to us. So that was just something that I thought was worth bringing up. It was interesting to me, and I know that I could, definitely relate it back to your experience because you've been through a lot of these things in your accidents. So, and I find that what you went through so fascinating.
I can definitely tell you that I knew I was in trouble when I started feeling what I can only, again, describe as piranhas.
Yeah.
If you were to pinch your arm really hard and pull on it, and then multiply that all over your upper body, that's what it felt like.
Yeah.
And I knew that I was struggling for my soul, for what it was worth. So, I fell back on St. Michael, which I knew what I was. I was a soldier. I knew, I was not in the good graces of the church, but I knew what I was. I knew I was a good person. And when I invoked him, I was brought back. So that's why St. Michael, is so dear and precious to me.
It would be interesting to do a study on people that have either been in medically induced coma or a traumatic induced coma, and see if their religious foundation has any impact or correlation to the nature of the coma experience, because you're definitely not out there in a state of permanent unconsciousness. People that go into a coma, I think sometimes the layperson thinks that a coma is like complete unconsciousness. It is not. When they tell you to talk to a family member who might be in a coma because it can help them, there's actual validity to that, because people that do come out of comas do report having heard those things. So there's definitely a rudimentary awareness that's taking place. And so, it's just, I would like to know whether or not the religious foundation of a person can shape or direct some of whether or not those coma experiences are very negative, as what this person described and what you described prior to your resurgence in the church. Because I wonder if it would have been different. Like if it happened today, God forbid, would your experience in a coma be different today because now you have such a solid spiritual foundation that you didn't have back then? It would be interesting to know.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, back then, of course, I was more into my shamanism. I was not into the church at all. I hadn't been to an organized church in years.
Yeah.
But I knew that I could fall back on the faith that I was raised with. Not even Catholic, but Protestant. But, the saints always have their patron saint of something, and being law enforcement, St. Michael was the one to call back to, and something told me to call to him, so I did. And then I think I've mentioned before on the podcast prior where after I had woken up, I was still seeing things. Like I saw a banner around my hospital room that looked like it was elvish to me from like Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, you said it was like
Yeah, and I had no idea what it was. I thought I was hallucinating, but several years later, when I'm watching an episode of Supernatural, they're using Enochian symbols to banish angels and other entities, and I recognized it as the writing that was on the walls in my hospital room, and it was Enochian. I had no friggin' clue what Enochian was in 2012. So that really woke me up to start me on my journey to find out what the hell was going on, and then like a year later, I found you. So everything in this process was meant to be.
There's no question about it. I mean, unfortunately, it happened, although I wish it hadn't had to have been so traumatic of a event. But I guess that's what you might have needed.
Sometimes I feel like Jacob, who wrestled the angel all night, and he was left with a permanent limp.
Well, I mean,
when you question God and try to fight him, you're left with permanent damage, but if you've come out on the end, you know that you've got his favor. So sometimes, when I think back of the injuries I have, I'm still in one piece, but it's a reminder. It reminds me of the story of Jacob wrestling the angel. And I figure, you know what? I'm still walking, but I have this reminder that I tried to walk away from God more than once, and he reminded me who was in charge.
Well, it's all so fascinating. It really is. We definitely
it really is.
Need to explore that whole arena more, I think. Not just from a religious vantage.
But I haven't got the gumption yet, but I've thought about doing some regression on it.
Yeah, well, maybe we can work on that sometime. All right, let's go ahead and start taking some calls here. The number to call in is 516-453-0138. That's 516-453-0138. 516-453-0138. Go ahead and call in now. We might not take your call right away, but get into the queue so that when we do take your call, the sooner you call in, the better the chances of getting your question taken on the air. So we appreciate that. And of course, towards the end of the show or the second half of the show, we'll start looking at some questions also from the chat room for those who do not wish to call in. But I really do encourage you, call into the show. Makes it a lot more interesting for all of the listeners. And I think it's a little bit easier to answer a question or take a comment, when we can actually talk directly like this. But calling in right now from the 4400 area code out there in Ohio. Hello, you are on the air.
Hi, Bishop Bryan. Hi, Sister Mary Joan.
Hello.
I was calling. Hi, this is Tiffany.
Oh, Tiffany. Yes.
I was calling in. I was calling about an experience I had a few years back, and it really stuck with me. And I just kind of wanted to hear both of your opinion on it.
Sure.
So, when I was pregnant with my daughter, I kept getting a feeling like there's something wrong. There's something wrong. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I felt like there was something wrong. She was born healthy, and, I was absolutely relieved by that. But, I still kept that feeling. I kept a watchful eye on her. And then, so just before she turned 5, she kept getting infection after infection, and she'd get antibiotics, and then she'd get better. And anyway, one night I was sleeping with her because she wasn't feeling well, and so her bed faces the door to our hallway, and I looked up, and in the doorway there was a giant dog, just a giant dog staring at the both of us. And like at that point, I knew there was something like really, really wrong with her. And then like I went to her doctor, and the next day she was diagnosed with cancer. Now, I was asleep before this happened.
Yeah.
And but afterwards I was wide awake. I stared at this dog. Well, it stared back at me. Back at the both of us, actually. She was still sleeping, but I just, kind of wanted to hear what you all have to say about that.
Yeah, definitely. So a few questions first before I really get into this. So she never saw it. Only you did because she was sleeping.
Yes.
And
yes, that's correct.
When you saw this thing, did it disappear before your eyes? Did it walk off in another direction and then disappear? How did it leave your presence?
It just kind of faded away.
In front of you?
It faded away. I mean, it was standing in the doorway, but it kind of faded away. Like, like I said, I was sleeping, and then I woke, I looked at the doorway, and I was definitely awake after that. So whether it was a dream or I was awake and actually saw this, I can't say one way 100% for sure.
Well, it's not, from a paranormal or metaphysical perspective, it's not really absolutely relevant whether or not it was quote unquote just a dream or whether or not it was an actual apparition or vision from waking consciousness. That's actually less important than we give credit to. I think we tend to sort of dismiss things. Oh, it's just a dream. It's just a dream. It was just a dream. You were in that halfway state, so you were still dreaming. I hear that all the time when people have extraordinary paranormal experiences. The fact of the matter is, though, when you really get into some of these extraordinary paranormal experiences that apparently happen only while people are either in a halfway state or dreaming, there's still very real effects that occur as the result of them. So I'm not so sure it really matters whether or not a person is actually awake or actually asleep or somewhere in between. I think what's relevant is whether or not it actually had an impact or effect on your reality as a direct result of that encounter. Because I really am a strong, I strongly contend, okay, I strongly support the worldview that states that when we are sleeping or when we are decreasing our state of awareness and changing it into what would be the waves of brain activity that take us into REM or even just unconsciousness, I really think that altered state does indeed open us up to other non-corporeal, or what we would refer to in more vernacular terms, spiritual awareness. So I really think that it doesn't really matter whether or not you were sleeping or not. What you had was a direct encounter with something that was relevant and to the events that then actually came, in the sense that what followed after you encountered it. So
Right.
What I would say in terms of an animal like this, what did the dog look like? Was it like a giant, like a Rottweiler or a German Shepherd?
It was just a big brown dog. Like he had like droopy eyes and it was just a big brown dog. Like I couldn't tell you what breed it was. It was just, it was just a large, like it was a very large dog.
Was it vicious?
Attention,
did it invoke fear in you, or was it something that?
It didn't. I was totally calm. Like I looked at it, like, but then I was like, something's wrong with her. Like immediately, I was like, something's really wrong with her.
What I would say in this
that experience for it to.
Yeah, what I would say in this context, based upon what you're telling me right now. And for the audience out there, those of you who might not know, Tiffany has been a long-term student of mine. She's been part of the webinar that we've had, and so she's very well versed and familiar. I baptized, her daughter. We've she has a lot of background with the work that I do and certain types of terms and concepts that we deal with in a more advanced way, because I mean that's what my course offers is a more advanced way of looking at some of these things that we take for granted in the paranormal genre. So she knows this stuff fairly well. But what I mean, obviously you know about the archetypes, Tiffany, and you know that that's primarily how communication occurs. And in this context, it's similar in that respect. This is a definite type of archetypal communication. The thing is, though, is that animals have a definitive connection to the universe. So, you know, again, like we were talking on, I think it was either the last show or the show before, and one of the questions that comes up so often is people wanting to know whether or not their animals go to heaven with them, or whether or not their pets, you know, have an eternal soul. And they get really upset when I tell them what the church teaches on this. And you know, because they don't really fully understand. Well, first of all, they don't understand that animals don't want a human afterlife. That's something you want, or that's not something they want. And so therefore, they're not as inclined to need or require something, because they are already so much more naturally inclined to the regular movement of the universe, from both the corporeal and non-corporeal aspects. So death is actually quite natural for them. It's not something that they don't feel the fear that we get. They don't have towards death. I mean, they know. They definitely have a sense of knowing when their impending death is about to happen. I mean, anyone who owns an animal will tell you that, you know, cats will typically go off to themselves and stay in another room, that in their behavior changes. They sort of remove themselves a little bit from the activity, sometimes entirely. And that's sort of how animals prepare themselves for that dying process, which is, again, something part of their nature. And their afterlife, or what we would consider afterlife, is very much integration into the natural cycles of the universe. They become part of the very universe that from which they spawned. Not to be these individual creatures, but rather to be aspects of the forces of nature, which is ultimately what we all are anyway. We just sort of elevate ourselves to something that's far and beyond that, because we have an inflated idea of ourselves. Human beings just are prone to that sort of egotism, and that's problematic from a spiritual point of view. And animals would not understand this at all if we could communicate with them at the same level of intellect that we do with ourselves. However, that being said, you know, it is very common for the forces of nature that are always communicating with us. There's always something that is out there to speak something about the quality of time to us. And people can use various tools for this, and that's where divination is something that is brought into the mix of how do we communicate with the natural world, and the looking for omens and that type of thing. You know, tarot cards, runes, I Ching, you know, anything really that allows us archetypal communication is going to tell us something about being able to draw on the energy of the time and illustrate it out before us in a way that we can read. That's ultimately what divination is. It's not communication with demons. It's not, you know, invoking the devil. It's ultimately about communicating with the natural forces of nature that are all around us, that we just, as egotistical human beings, don't pay attention to anymore. We're too distracted by our cell phones, our television shows, our movies, our politics, and all the other crap that goes on in the media to even focus on spiritual matters. We're too self-absorbed in the human experience that we're not connected to nature objectively like animals are. So it is very, very possible that the animal and the energy of the animals that are already spawned around us could reconstitute in various ways through these experiences and then come and share messages with us. Now, usually that's done with birds, and that's typically done with living birds. So it's very common for when there is something very important for at the spiritual level, for somebody to receive a message, that a bird will actually literally convey that message. And again, if you don't know how to listen to the universe, you're really not, even if a bird comes to you, you might not even know. Sometimes it's something a lot more subtle. I know that I can tell you right now, a butterfly if it lands on you, if it's not afraid of you, that is always a message. Always, always, always a message. Because typically speaking, butterflies might move around you, but they won't necessarily want you to go near them because they're very fragile creatures. They don't live very long to begin with, but they're fragile. You know, touch their wing and it's pretty much game over for them. So when they land on you, it's nature. It's the very forces of nature themselves coming to share with you an experience. It's something that you need to know. And if we knew how to listen, if we knew how to pay attention, we would always get the message perfectly clear every single time. Now, shamanic cultures know this. Shamanic cultures understand this. This is what the whole idea of animal guides and spirit guides come to.
I'm over here waving my hand like, hey.
Yeah. So this might literally be, Tiffany, your animal guide that was here to sort of not just convey a message of the difficult time coming up ahead for you, but also to let you know that, hey, it's going to be okay. You're going to get through this. And you might have been just in that state, just enough, halfway between sleep, halfway between being awake enough to realize it's asleep enough to be able to experience it. That you were able to actually perceive something that would have happened automatically on a spiritual level that you might not have entirely realized at the time that it occurred. You were very fortunate to be able to get a peek into, a little window into that experience. But that would be my guess. So Sister Mary Joan, who's very much studied this type of shamanic reality, probably can put more insight into it. So I'll give it over to her now.
So from a shamanic Native American perspective, the dog has been one of our companions since time immortal. And the dog represents faithfulness, protection, guardianship. So for a dog to come to you in that way, it's basically telling you that I've got you and everything's going to be okay. And I don't know what your background is. I don't know what your faith is. I don't know. Does your daughter have a strong connection with animals, especially dogs?
I have my entire life. Apparently, I would walk up to junkyard dogs when I was a baby and just start petting them, and
So so all of us have we have our what we call totem animals or power animals, however you want to call it. Different cultures call it different things, and so we have a set group of animals that we are actually very connected to. And it sounds like yours is the dog. So this was probably nature's way or God's way of sending a message to you without freaking you out to let you know, hard times may be coming, but I have you. It's okay. I mean, after all, if you want to think about it, what does dog spell backwards?
Yes, absolutely.
God.
But, the thing that I was caught me off guard at the moment, when I started researching it actually, because I tried to get more and more information, but that it was standing in the doorway, So to me, I was just, either.
And the doorway itself could be a message. It's standing in the doorway between where you are and what's behind the dog. So it's standing in the gap. So it's saying, I'm your guardian. I've got you.
Yeah.
So that's actually kind of a beautiful thing. Definitely not anything to be afraid of. And it's letting you know, through the spiritual aspects of nature that you have a guardian watching over you and your daughter. That's what I get from it, from a shamanic aspect. It's for
sure. And I like I said, I never felt any fear from that, but I knew, we needed to take action and immediately. So
and everything's good now.
Everything is great now. She's doing so well. She just turned 12 on the 13th, so
absolutely
she is
beautiful.
doing wonderful.
Absolutely beautiful.
That's fantastic. And I mean, I think in some ways animals, whether they are the remnants of our pets from previous experiences or whether they are just the energy of the natural world around us, not only come to us to convey messages, but to empower us when we need that. And sometimes we don't realize this because, see, unfortunately, the Christian worldview doesn't have a good corollary for this. It's more shamanic. And it's more primitive, and unfortunately, the Judeo-Christian worldview sort of moved beyond some of those aspects that are so important, and thankfully there are cultures that have preserved this, because I think if Christianity had had its way, it would have done away with all of it through its missionary efforts. But God's a little bit wiser than we are, and he's a hell of a lot wiser than the church is. So even though he sets certain things up, there's always fail safes and that preserve and protect those things that are truly good. And this is one of those things. And so I think this is definitely a blessing. This is something that,
yes, definitely.
I mean, the fact that you didn't feel fear or anxiety, or there was something vicious about it. We're not dealing with like a hellhound kind of archetype here. We're dealing with something that is more protective and reinforcing.
Right. And that was kind of my question of where I was going towards, because there's a lot of information about hellhounds, but not so much about guardian dogs.
No.
The way you described your experience, definitely not a hellhound.
No.
Right.
It's a good thing too. You won't want a hellhound in a situation like that.
No, I don't.
Nah.
I absolutely don't. I've had enough stuff. I don't need hellhounds. So.
No one needs
do.
that. That's a great story, though, Tiffany. Thank you for sharing that. And
no
you've never told me
Thank
that one
you.
before. That's good.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for calling in, Tiffany. God bless.
Right.
Yeah,
Bye-bye.
thank you so much. That's a great one. I mean, it really definitely shows,
Yeah.
aspects of our spirituality that are not so cleanly categorizable into this religion or that religion, or saying that just because I'm a bishop, people immediately assume that means that I think so highly of myself that I have the only connection to the truth that can possibly exist, and everything that I teach about Christianity is the only truth, and that's all there is. What people don't realize, and as a bishop it's very important for me to address this, is that the Bible and Scripture and everything that is part of the apostolic tradition of Christianity, including the Judeo-Christian worldview and all of its complex theology, is really nothing more, though, than an instrument of, I should say, a guidebook for the attainment of salvation. It doesn't go into anything that's beyond that very category. So to think that, the idea that an animal, as a manifestation of the natural universe around to empower an individual to get through a difficult time, that doesn't have anything to do with salvation. That's a completely different aspect of the spiritual world. It's something that's a temporal assistance for a moment that you're having as a human being, because the Judeo-Christian worldview is so focused on the ultimate result of all things, which is, of course, the restoration of the universe, bringing it back to a state of perfection, entering into perfect union with God. These end times focus, which is what the entire Christian worldview is theologically. It's not going to get into the nitty gritty aspects of just those few things. It's not going to talk about how spiritual entities can form and manifest as animals to us and then share empowerments to help you get through a tough time in your life. It's not about that. It wasn't written to talk about those things. It doesn't mean that those things, though, don't exist just because they weren't contained there. It's just the Bible only deals with salvation. It's a soteriological history. That's it. And that's not the entirety of the spiritual world. It's just that one part of it that is the ultimate, most important focus, but still not the only aspect of it. So fortunately, things like shamanism and shamanic tradition have helped to preserve some of this. Doesn't invalidate it, because it seems to be contradictory to the Christian worldview. And say, this is where I come in. Because as a bishop, I'm very comfortable with both aspects of this. I have dealt with spirits my entire life. I have encountered spiritual things my entire life that fall far and beyond outside the Judeo-Christian worldview traditional concept. And that's what kind of led me into where I'm at. Why I couldn't stay a Roman Catholic bishop. All these people out there are always harassing me and criticizing me online and saying, "Well, you were kicked out of the Roman Catholic Church. That's why you're no longer, you're not a Roman Catholic priest."
Yeah,
Like,
that's
no,
not what happened.
I was not kicked out. I kicked myself out because I didn't want to be a part of it because it was just too rigid. There was too much more to the spiritual world than what I was allowed to explore as a Roman Catholic seminarian. That's why I had to move on. They didn't move me on. I moved myself on. Believe me, they fought to keep me. It was just me that I could not reconcile myself to that rigidity and thinking. I needed an arena where I could still absolutely be a follower of Christ, but also at the same time recognize that there's a whole lot more than what the Bible talks about out there, and that needs to be explored too. So this is a great story for that.
Yeah, there's a series of books by Mary Summerain I read back in the 90s, and she stayed with a shamanic woman for some time, and her name was No Eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And I do not remember what tribe she was, what affiliation she was.
Right.
But something she said resonated with me up until this day, and I'm sure I'm not quoting her correctly, but it was along the lines of everything we need to know, nature can provide us. We have just but to shut up and listen.
So true.
And I find it very true because when I'm frustrated and going through some things, the best thing for me to do is to go back into my woods, sit down, do some grounding, and just listen and watch. And you'd be surprised what comes forth and presents itself to you. It's a beautiful thing when you can connect with nature, when you can actually speak with nature, and there are lessons to be learned. The problem is in today's society, we dismiss it right away. We don't even consider it, but it's a real thing. And animals are messengers. It's in the Bible. God used doves and birds quite a bit.
Yeah.
So they are there to teach us lessons.
We
just have to listen.
We've been conditioned to think in a certain way, and it's very difficult to unlearn some of that conditioning, and that's hopefully what we're trying to achieve here with not just the Holy Nicholean Catholic Church, but also shows like this one. I'm calling in from the 850 area code out there in Florida. Hello, you're on the air.
Hi, Bishop Bryan, Sister Mary Joan.
Hi.
My name's
Hello.
Lindsay.
Lindsay.
Hi.
Hey, Lindsay.
My question it's a question, but it's not really a personal question. It's a curiosity, I suppose. Family demons, inherited family demons.
Mm-hmm.
Is there such a thing, and specifically inherited from child or parent to child in abusive situations where the cycle just continues?
Like a generational curse?
Yes, I think so,
Mm-hmm.
yeah. And I guess there wouldn't be such a thing as assigned to family negative energies, I guess, to continue the cycle till somebody breaks it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's basically what it is. It's an attachment that is not reconciled, and so therefore that attachment, as the original source of the attachment moves on in age to the point where either they're too weak to be a proper fuel source for that demonic entity, or they die, then the entity will then attach to somebody new in order to continue to perpetuate its existence. And so that can come in numerous possible ways. But it's always done through attachment. It can be through the generational curse that Sister Mary Joan was asking about. It can also be in a much more simplistic form of just simply an attachment, or it could be more than likely a manifestation of what we call that third category of demons. Remember, we've got those 4 categories, and I probably should mention it every time we talk about this so that people that are new to this model understand where we're going with this. So again, there's 4 types that we look for. There's the fallen angels. That's the true demon. Okay, they're the most rare. They're the most unlikely. Right. Number 2 is the elementals. These are natural forces in the world, and some of them happen to be energetically contrary to the type of energy that is healthy for us to be around, which means that when we come in contact with those energies, we get sick, or there are other problems that can result. And it's not that they're malevolent by nature, it's just they're energetically not compatible with us, and that makes us sick, and it can create the same types of experiences that people report in a demonic oppression. The third category is created. These are thought forms, tulpas, egregores, any kind of manifestation, either an occult manifestation through ritual or an accidental manifestation through trauma, can produce a demonic entity that externalizes itself from the psyche and creates a perpetual tormentor for the victim. And then lastly, the fourth category, which is wrathful spirits, and these are the people that were living just like us, who died in a poorly, either in a state of trauma or a state of wrath or hatred, and then they become that very thing which was their last thought, and that becomes also a demonic presence in a person's life if that does not move on correctly. What can happen in your particular case is usually the third, what you're describing, not your case, but what you're describing is the third category, where if a person were to be the kind of individual that externalizes their trauma instead of internalizing it. See, the natural, normal way for people to repress a traumatic experience is to simply internalize it to the point that they don't even remember it. It becomes such a repressed aspect of their psyche that what it does is it just causes internal conflicts like anxiety, depression, suicidal ideation, that type of thing. But in a smaller group of the population, what ends up happening is instead of repressing it or suppressing it, what they do is they externalize it and project it outward into a thought form. And everyone has the ability to do this. You do not need to be, a ceremonial magician or an occultist to conjure a demonic force out of your own mind. Anyone by their very nature is capable of producing this, and trauma is usually just enough energy to be able to do this very successfully. And so what ends up happening is it becomes an external tormentor. So let me give you an example. Let's say you, God forbid, have a child who has been repeatedly abused sexually by their parents, let's say. And so what ends up happening is the child, rather than repressing all of that to deal with the trauma as they continue to age and have this conflict within themselves emotionally as well as physically, what some can do, those that are more inclined to this, can project out the trauma into what becomes a demon that continues on that abuse, only now from an outside vantage point. And so what happens is they get rid of the guilt and the feelings of lack of worth and all of these other things that can manifest out of a person who suffers such a trauma, and it becomes a demon outside of them that then convinces them of the same thing. And this becomes such a real entity that even other people can experience that demon when they are in close proximity to that original person. If that person's part of a family, then that demon can then grow in such force that it can start to attach to other members of the family, causing also the same type of manifestation emotionally and psychologically, even physically. If it gets strong enough, it can affect the person. So these are the normal ways in which there can be a demon that stays with a family through several generations. So the short answer to your question is absolutely yes, this does indeed happen. We've seen it several times, and it can be a real, excuse the language, it can be a bitch of a thing to get rid of, because there is just no, once it has had so many generations of energy put into it, it really does not want to give up its position. And typically it's difficult to get the family to be cooperative because they've been so manipulated by this thing over the course of time that they're not really doing the things that they need to be doing. And there's only, as an exorcist, so much that you can do. Exorcists are facilitators. We're not magicians. We do not come in, wave a magic wand, say an incantation, and get rid of the problem. What we do is we facilitate an environment in which it makes it very uncomfortable for a demonic demonic force to retain its cohesion, and then that usually gives enough of an edge for the victim to be able to remove the entity themselves through the reinforcement that we can provide. But we don't actually, I mean, there's not much we can do if we don't get that help from that side of it. So, so that's what's going on in those kinds of cases, but they're very difficult. I'll tell you, anytime we get a client that suspects that there's some kind of generational curse or demon going on, it's always, you always start feeling the pressure in your temples immediately because you know you're in for a real hard time.
Yeah, it's not just usually a one and done. It's a process.
It is, yeah.
Huh.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, thank you. That really was my question.
No, sure. Well, thank you for calling in and asking it, Lindsay. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Lindsay.
Yeah.
Okay. Bye-bye.
You have a wonderful evening.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question because it's something that, of course, is something that we see. And, generational curses are absolutely, or generational attachments, which are pretty much in a lot of ways the same thing. It's just what determines an attachment from a curse is the causation. Did somebody actually send this to you, or did you actually bring it on yourself? That's the only difference. But the end result is the same. So, anytime that happens, you're dealing with, of course, a very long-term solution. And it can be so long-term that because families have usually learned to live with it, that they don't really want to have to facilitate the necessary changes to bring about a better way of life. They've gotten comfortable with it. And a lot of people you'll find who have had long-term demonic attachments get very, very comfortable with the notion of having that attachment. There's really very little you can do to convince such people other than to instruct them the best that you can and teach them that there is indeed a better way of life. This is Bishop Bryan Ouellette and Sister Mary Joan, and this is Vestiges After Dark, Open Lines. We'll be right back after this. Don't go away.
I am here in the middle of nowhere. There is no there, it is cold there, but I am safe and I am warm. Although it's hard, I know I gotta keep up, no time to lay, to drift away. I spend my days, I spend my time down the rabbit hole again, and as I fall I can feel the pain. You can't tell me where to go, so I don't know, I just go with the flow. I go with the flow. I'm falling up, I'm falling down, from the sky and from the ground. Up above just like below, and I don't know where I should go. 'Cause I'm stuck in limbo.
Well, welcome back, everyone, to Vestiges After Dark. This is your host, Bishop Bryan Ouellette, and I've got Sister Mary Joan on the line, as well as some other callers. Number to call is 516-453-0138. That's 516-453-0138. As we enter into the second half of the show, call in now and get into the queue. We want to hear from you. Don't go away. Well, thank you, everybody, for joining us for the second half of the show and staying through the break. We definitely appreciate all of you. And once again, I just want to tell everyone, please give us a call, 516-453-0138. That's 516-453-0138. And we might take you on the air to listen to what you have to say. If it be a question about the paranormal, the metaphysical, the esoteric, religion, or something else. There's no limits. There's no rules for Vestiges After Dark open lines, right, sister?
Nope. Whatever you want to talk about.
Yeah, it's your show. It's not my show. It's your show.
Answer, we'll make one up.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, I was watching. I think some people wanted me to talk about this, and it wasn't something I wanted to tweet about because it's too involved. And I thought I'd mention it briefly before we go back into taking open calls. But the Pope initially, you probably saw this. The Pope, the Vatican, rather, put out an announcement that said that they cannot grant blessings to same-sex marriages. They won't do that. I think there was
I did see something about that earlier today, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, there was some talk earlier. Pope Francis. He's not a saint yet.
Let's not make him a saint yet.
Yeah, let's not make him a saint yet. Pope Francis, had talked about. He's a little bit more on the progressive side of things, and he had talked about maybe as a concession to, obviously there's limitations that in the sacramental theology that forever prevent there being a sacramental union between a gay couple, and that of course goes back to the fact that marriage is not about falling in love. Marriage is about having babies from a sacramental standpoint. That he thought maybe this would be a way to sort of give a concession to the problem. Maybe concession's not even the right word. Maybe it's just a way of reconciling the problem to the best that the church can offer. And I guess after much talk about this, they decided to do it, and their official statement was, and that's because the church cannot offer a blessing for sin because God cannot bless sin. And I thought to myself, from the standpoint as to, because I've been having to make some decisions lately as a bishop of a independent Catholic church, so usually we follow the magisterium's directions. So if the Vatican issues a change, the Nicholean Church typically goes with that change, unless there's something that violates our own personal canons. At that point, then we have to make some kind of modification ourselves in order to address it. And still hold true to the Nicholean tradition, which is obviously a much more open Christian or Catholic tradition than Roman Catholicism. However, that being said, it's been difficult. So like recently they came out with this thing where no longer because they want to get back to some more original liturgical language where at the end of the prayers where we say one God forever and ever, they want to change it back to, or they have changed it back to God forever and ever, getting rid of where it says one God forever and ever. They're saying that's a later addition, which it is. It is more contemporary than just saying God forever and ever. But we didn't go with that change. We didn't take that change because I think from the vantage point of the work that we do and the type of population that actually is motivated to listen to us, I think it's important to maintain instructional understanding as to what we're referring to, because even though I'm a very open individual and I respect all religions and I value all religions, I do not do that at the expense of my of the Christian faith. I, as a bishop, still have to hold true to apostolic tradition. And apostolic tradition holds that there is one true God, and that is, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. And so I think it's important to always maintain those semantics for those who might be thinking that, maybe when I talk about God, I'm actually talking about like, Shiva or something, because there's people out there that probably do think that. So it's important that they understand that. But I can understand where the Vatican's coming from with this issue. I get it. Because I do understand the sacramental theology, and I understand the theology of matrimony, and that there's certain limitations to that cannot be resolved. You can't fix them according to the sensibilities of modern inclinations. You can't do that because it's just not possible based upon how these things work or how these graces are conferred. But at the same time, I don't understand why they can't simply say, let's bless the individuals involved. And why does it have to be necessarily I can understand them not even making a rite for this, because even that might be seen as an endorsement or something. But why can't you just leave it as a blessing for those who need it and leave it from that? I mean, just go from there. And that's what the Nicholean Church has always done. We haven't had any problems. We've served a very large number of homosexual people. We've served a very large number of people that fall into all of these other categories that the church has traditionally oppressed by their rigidity and judgmental nature. And we've never had an issue with that, because if somebody comes to me for a blessing, I bless them. I don't have to question their way of life or their identity or how they see themselves, or I don't have to question any of it. God's blessing is free, and it can always help.
Yeah, it's not between you and them. It's between them and God.
Right.
And you know my feelings on it. You can't help who you fall in love with.
Right.
I'm of the belief that souls don't have a gender. And if your souls are connected in some way on some deep level, and you're true to each other, and as you say, you're authentic to each other, who are we to bash that? It's between them and God. So, a blessing's a blessing.
Right.
I have a hard time reconciling that myself.
Yeah. So, I guess we'll have to make a modification to our canons to address this, but, the official position will be, for those of you listening now, that the Holy Nicholean Catholic Church will continue its long-standing position to bless individuals regardless of their own orientations, because their own orientations are their own business and not the business of the church. And everyone is entitled to a relationship with God. God desires a relationship with everyone, regardless of how they define themselves. And there is nobody that should stand in the way of that. And certainly not.
And it's definitely not our business who you sleep with.
No. And that's actually part of our canons, where it literally specifically says it is not the job to live in the bedrooms of its members. This church does not. That's not how it sees itself, and we're not going to be telling people how to.
No, I'm not into that kind of kink.
No.
What you do is your business.
Oh, I love it. Anyway, wanted to address it because I thought it was important. Calling in from the 415 area code in Northern California. Hello, you're on the air.
Hi. Hello, Bishop. Hello, Sister Mary.
Hello.
Hey, good evening.
Hi. So, excuse me. We've spoken many a time on Twitter. My Twitter handle is Foolish Mortal, so you might, maybe remember.
Oh yeah, yeah. I see you pop up every now and then.
Yeah. In fact, I've bugged you many times. Foolish Mortal. I appreciate your candor and your honesty when we engage in subjects that I am learning from you about, or even maybe disagree. I found our interactions very, I don't know, just very helpful, and I appreciate your willingness to help people you don't know. So, and that goes for both of you. So,
thank you.
Thank you. Yeah,
just wanted to
means
start
a lot.
by saying that, and really, my question, I have many, but I'll just kind of stick to something that's kind of current for me. I lost my father a year ago, nearly a year ago to the day. And before I lost my father, I had been growing curious in my adult life about, spiritual matters, spirits. Can you interact with them? Can you not? Is it something you should ever even try to do, et cetera? And I've had conversations with you, Bishop, in fact, recently about the collective unconscious and kind of you're getting kind of a copy, not the true spirit itself if you ever communicate, but kind of the downloaded memories and experiences, i.e. the collective unconscious. So my question is there ever a true, authentic experience you could have with a loved one who has passed? Like, meaning them, not the copy, not their thoughts that have been downloaded. And is it ever advantageous to, I don't know, talk to someone who is maybe psychically inclined or maybe spiritually inclined about something like that? Or is it just kind of, is it a gamble? Is it something you don't want to get into? I've never done that. And so I'm just very curious because my thoughts are constantly with my father about, I'm hoping that he's, you hope for people you love that they move on and they move on well and they die well. So
sure,
that's my question. Is it ever worth trying to experience something like that? And I'm curious your take on it, both of you.
It's a good question. It really is, because I think it's something that's on a lot of people's minds. It's a very natural.
I think everybody thinks about it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a natural thing to wonder about, I think, and certainly this goes back in church history for some time, because even Thomas Aquinas, who was one of the greatest teachers of the Catholic faith, talked about things of this very nature and gives us some guideposts as to how to look at it and how to understand it. So, your basic question is there ever a time where this is actually the genuine individual? Because
correct.
And maybe I need to kind of preface what I'm about to say for those who might not have been privy to that Twitter interaction, or even things that I've taught in the past about this. And there's certainly previous episodes of Vestiges of Christianity as well as Vestiges After Dark, where I discuss the afterlife in detail. And I don't have the time to get into all of those specifics, but essentially, and I know a lot of mediums out there are going to be really pissed at me now because, they don't necessarily like when I talk about this, but the fact of the matter is, whether you're of the Eastern religious faith like Buddhism or Hinduism, or you're of, the Western worldview, particularly Judeo-Christian theology, it really comes down to the simple fact that when you go back to the ancient understandings, before modern conceptions of afterlife sort of pervaded the consciousness and sort of altered the way these religions operated, prior to that happening, there was always a definitive understanding that death was death, right? That's what made Jesus Christ such a remarkable thing to the people, to his contemporaries, because he was teaching that there was a way to escape that, and not just escape it, but to actually eliminate it, to conquer it, so it can no longer affect anyone ever again. Because the natural result in the Judeo-Christian worldview of sin whether it be original sin or any sin that we perpetuate as the result of original sin, leads to death. That's the consequence. Now, the Bible uses the term punishment, but it's really not a punishment. It's just the ultimate result. It's like what you have done is by creating sin, by violating the will of God, we bring imperfection into our reality. Imperfection, by its very nature, is contrary to God's reality, which means that we cannot unite to him because he's too perfect. And if we make ourselves less than perfect, then we're no longer compatible with his reality, which means that not only can we not unite ourselves with him, but we can't exist in any way to the reality that he knows, which we typically refer to in Christianity as the kingdom of heaven. So that's what makes death the natural result of sin, is that there is no way to reconcile that outside of the perfection of God. That's when Jesus comes and says, we've got a solution now. I am going to come in here and I'm going to fix this. However, there's responsibility there. It's not an automatic thing. It's not like he comes in and fixes it for us and we can just continue on in our wicked ways and not actually reaffirm what he teaches us. We have to actually follow after him in order to receive the benefits of it. That's the work part of it that, Protestants typically don't like to talk about, but the fact of the matter is faith and works are always two sides of the same coin. They're not in opposition to each other theologically. They actually work together because, yes, you need the faith in order to make salvation possible, but at the same time, you need the works in order to attain to it. Because they have to be working simultaneously together for that to happen. So that's the Judeo-Christian worldview. So the idea here is that anyone that does not attain to salvation is basically what the church typically would refer to as hell. And of course, we have a medieval sort of Dante's Inferno understanding of hell, where we see it as again, this eternal punishment, because we have this notion, thanks to Plato and Aristotle, that we think we have an eternal soul. We don't. The Jews never believed that. In the ancient Jews never believed that. Buddhism doesn't believe that. They have a doctrine on this called anatta, which literally means no soul. One has to actually build a soul, if you really want to look at it from more of a Gurdjieff standpoint. This idea of actually constructing one, creating a condition of permanence. So from the Judeo-Christian worldview, there's salvation, and then there's basically annihilation. From the esoteric metaphysical worldview, you could say there is permanence and then there's impermanence. All things are impermanent until they are made permanent. They can only be made permanent through perfection. That gets us back to the same basic methodology that Jesus teaches us, only, without the religious terminology. So Gurdjieff really understood this. He just kind of took it outside of some of the religious language so that people that were more inclined to that more pragmatic, less religious model could understand it. But they're basically saying the same thing. So that being said, when a medium reaches out using either themselves as the conduit, or if a person in a ghost hunting scenario were to take a SB7, or what you see on the Ghost Adventures, or the ghost shows, the ghost hunting shows, and there's no shortage of those anymore. They're using all this equipment to communicate. EVP is the big one. EVP is one of the oldest ones. I remember watching this old show. I don't even remember which network it was on, but it was called Sightings. And that was the first time I was introduced to the idea of EVP. And I was really startled when I grabbed a brand new, fresh out of the package micro cassette tape, put it into my micro cassette player, turned it on, started asking questions, and in the background noise, there were voices that answered me. I was really shocked by this because I thought, my God, this is not just some television show that's, just talking a lot of fanatical gibberish to kind of create entertainment value. There is something to this phenomenon called EVP. And that's really the beginning, the catalyst to when I got into this. Obviously, the world view that has been built around the paranormal genre has been that these voices are actually the voices of the dead communicating. You go to haunted locations, you call out for somebody that might have died there, and then you get a voice that says it's them, and it sounds like them. If people have knowledge of what their voice sounded like. It's not uncommon for the very voice of the person to come through in the EVP, and you say, oh, there we've made contact. Then you get seances, going back to the spiritualist movement in the late 1800s, where you had, back in the days of the ectoplasm and the table, levitation stuff. All of these things have become part of this idea that the dead are sort of in this other dimension, watching over us, can interact with us, can kind of come and go through these things that we now call portals, and that these are the actual beings that they were, just in another state, another reality, but they're the same thing. The fact of the matter is, almost the entire reality that we understand as human beings is built upon our physical nature. So you have, and I'm not being a materialist here, it's just a simple reality that our understanding of reality is almost exclusively dependent upon the five senses, which are all physical, and then the brain, which interprets those five senses and turns it into something meaningful. Both of those things, the body and the brain, the body's part of the brain, decomposes when the person dies. So you don't have the benefit of those faculties anymore when you're dead. There is still, though, a spiritual nature, which we recognize. Even Buddhism, with its doctrine of anatta, no soul, recognizes that there's a spiritual nature. It calls it the alaya, this idea that there is something of that individual that sort of carries on. But now we're not dealing with something that's cognitive in the sense that it can communicate in a way that would be rational or objective, like we're communicating right now. It would be something that's far more instinctual, far more rudimentary, because you're getting down to more of a primal aspect of the nature of a being, rather than something that's become more elevated and sophisticated through the evolutionary biological development of a body. So all of that, what that essentially translates to, when you break it all down, is that when a body dies, obviously the brain goes with it. So that all decomposes, but the spirit detaches at that point, and that starts to degrade too, because it too is part of this universe. This universe is entropic, and entropy demands that energy eventually dissipates. We're not going to states of increasingly more powerful states of energy. It's energy that is constantly breaking down. In fact, the pervading idea is that science has now for the end of the universe is what's called cold death. This idea that eventually all the energy of the universe will eventually burn itself out, and it'll be just it'll be just a void. That's one theory. Some think it's going to be the big crunch, where all of it gets contracted again and spawns a new big bang. That's probably also a big possibility, because there seems to be a sort of, something had to originate the big bang, and that had to take a certain amount of energy to do. Where did that energy come from? It had to be from something, and maybe it was from some previous universe that contracted. It's possible. We don't know, but that's beyond the understanding. But right now, in the current state of this universe, it's entropic, which means energy is burning out. So whether it be something that's physical that you can touch, or something spiritual that is more incorporeal, non-corporeal or intangible, it will dissipate. The energy will dissipate, but only after a period of time. We also know that the universe itself is sort of this big, almost like a hard drive that sort of just records data. And we see this even in traditional notions of ghost hunting, where you've probably even heard Zach Bagans talk about how, wood and stone can sort of absorb vibration.
Yeah,
and
stone tape theory.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And there's truth to that. And I would even argue that those might just be more receptive energy systems for recording data. But I would say everything in the universe actually does it. It's probably easier for us to extract that data from something like stone and wood rather than it would be from like plastic, which doesn't have the same kind of energetic properties that a natural element might have. So anyway, the point is, when a person lives and a person dies, energy is being expended. That energy has to go somewhere. We know that it doesn't just get destroyed. We just know that it gets transformed. And part of that transformation process is to record or get recorded or absorbed into the environment where it happened. So, sometimes that will be in the form of what they call these residual hauntings, where it's like the same event gets played out over and over again. And most ghost hunters today that have never even heard me speak about the model that I use would even agree and say that these are not intelligent hauntings because they're just replays of the energy that was already there. It's the intelligent ones that get people's attention, where you go in, you ask a question, and then you get intelligent responses back. And sometimes when you do something like SB7 or SB11, it sounds like there's like hundreds of people trying to talk to you, and it really gets people's attention when you hear your name being called, or it's a voice of someone that you're trying to reach, and it's someone that you knew in life and they're now dead, and now they're talking to you through this thing, and it feels like, my God, I've made connection. The fact of the matter is, though, that the universe, one of its fundamental properties is actually awareness, because we would not be able to be self-aware if that quality didn't come from somewhere that is a part of our nature. We can't be anything other than what our nature is designed to be, and one of our primary functions is to be self-aware. That's what's unique about us. And so therefore there has to be a quality of self-awareness in the universe that sort of became manifested in our understanding, that eventually translated to intellect and consciousness and cognitive ability.
One of the things that you mentioned, or you alluded to, was almost an instant awareness. So like an instant upload. So what freaks people out or trips people out, whatever you want to say, is maybe, if someone has a current thought in their head or something very specific, and they're maybe communicating, or they think they're communicating with a loved one, and that loved one, or they get a response back that is extremely applicable to exactly what they're thinking, that they've never thought of before. It's something very new, and so when you said it's kind of like an instant upload, that threw me. I didn't conceive of that possibility, and I think back to my childhood about me and my dad had a code word. Now, I've not tried to. And I believe I told you this before. I have not tried to reach out to my dad at all in any kind of formal way. I talk out loud maybe when I go to the cemetery with, and when I'm putting flowers down or something. But, and I told you, I think that, I haven't heard anything from him. And you almost responded like, well, that's probably a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
When we were talking, I'm just, so you're saying that there's that instant download that it's happening all the time, always.
All the energy in the universe has to go somewhere. It has to. It can't. When I say dissipation, we're not talking about annihilation of the energy. We're talking about the annihilation of cohesion. See, this is where you get some new agey people that try to explain that they can prove that the afterlife is real because of the laws of thermodynamics and this idea that energy cannot be created or destroyed. But there's nothing in the laws of thermodynamics that say that it has to stay cohesive. And a human being is a lot of cohesive energy. It's not just energy. It's energy that's actually organized in a very specific way that allows it to be able to do the things that it does over the course of 60, 70, 80, 90 years, or however long you might live. And that stays cohesive the whole time, generally, until you start to have problems that break down with age. Again, entropy gets you in the end. There's Alzheimer's, there's dementia, there's just the natural occurrences of old age, where that energy starts to break down. Not the energy itself is being annihilated, it's the cohesion of the energy that's being annihilated. And that's the personhood. So when we call ourselves a self, when we think that we're talking to an individual, that what you really mean by individual is a cohesion energy stream of countless billions, trillions of energy streams all coming together to work together to form what we see as the illusion of an individual person. But it's energy that eventually sort of breaks down with time. That you can't avoid unless there is some kind of what they call in esotericism superworks. And this is this idea of where we get into Gurdjieff, and then if you're more of a religiously minded person, you get into the idea of Christianity. This idea that there is a methodology to maintain the cohesion of that energy so that it maintains a state of permanence forever. And that's kind of where the result of the Christian religion comes from. So from a Judeo-Christian point of view, what your question was, is there ever a time where we're actually could be dealing with the actual individual? And the answer to that is yes, but only if God wills it. Because what would have to happen is that the person would have had to attain to salvation, would have maintained permanence through the grace of Jesus Christ, and God would have had to permit them for some reason to come back to convey a message to you, which is something that would have to be an extreme situation, because typically angels do that. Our loved ones do not need to do that. So it's always a good thing when you're not getting the signs of a lingering spirit when a loved one has recently passed, because that usually means that they have what we call crossover. The energy's not stuck here. And that can be a bad thing, because if energy stays partially cohesive, but doesn't actually break down the way it's supposed to, then what that eventually turns into is a wrathful spirit, and it degrades and can turn into, for all intents and purposes, a demonic attachment. That's that fourth category we were talking about earlier.
And your words, like, since I've been following you, were echoing through my mind during all of that horrible time last year. So I was making sure that the Catholic rites of burial were performed correctly, that there was no ashes being held in a home, that there was no kind of, I don't want my father's spirit to want to be here with me. And it's funny, in prayer sometimes I'll be like, Dad, I'd love to hear from you, but only if God wills that. I would never want you to come back to me to talk to me because you think that I need that or something. So it's funny that you said that. I would always say in my prayers, if God willed that and God wanted that to happen, that'll happen. But if not, I'm not. Everyone loves or hopefully people have love or respect for their parents and reverence after they pass away. And I believe my father lived a very good and pious life. He obviously sinned, as we all do, but
of course,
so I just my hopes and prayers are always that he did get to move forward and move on to where he should be. And but I do always have that human nagging want to just know that he's okay, and it's just hard to shake.
Yeah, and I mean that, I think, is just, again, it's part of human nature. It's part of how we function, because I mean, one of the aspects, and you might even say one of the detriments of love, is that there is a sort of rudimentary attachment that's built into it. It's hard to love someone if you don't grow attached to them. And then when you grow attached to them, you don't want to let go, but yet everything in this world passes away. And the only way to deal with that spiritually is to learn to come to terms and acceptance of it. And that's a very difficult thing when we are doing everything within our power on every aspect of our life to try to preserve it and to almost ignore that it exists, which is where we get into some of these spiritual problems. The good news is this, okay? If there is no communication from a dead relative, that's always a good sign, because if they've entered into a state of permanence where they would be, from the Judeo-Christian worldview, entered into the kingdom of heaven, then there would be no residual aspect of themselves that would stay behind. So it's always a good thing when there's nothing, because that is almost a sure sign that they have crossed over. And typically the only ones that truly cross over that successfully are those that have died with either in a state of skill or grace, or both, hopefully both. Because it can be done.
I've tried to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
I've tried to keep that in mind, that exact notion, while my dad was essentially dying. I kind of, I was, it wasn't that hard to tell something when doctors say, well, we think you have a 30% chance, then something's up. So, I won't get into this much longer at all, but I'll just say that my dad, last 15 years of his life, my dad was a very successful man in Silicon Valley, very well known. He's devoted his last 15 years of his life for foster children, being a court-appointed advocate for free to minority foster youth, and his whole last years of his life were just to to give back and to help kids who have nothing. And so I just hope, I hope for what many of us hope for, that our good deeds outweigh our poor ones, and that we come to some state of grace at the end of our lives. So I haven't heard from him. I don't do any kind of, I'm not asking him, talking to him, or trying to pull him towards me. I just always wanted to hear you explain this in more detail about, would you ever even entertain it? Is it the last question, I guess, is it just knowing what you just said, do you still see people that go searching for these things, and can it be healing at all to them, or is it just kind of a very human thing that they can't let go of, and it's just it's kind of a crapshoot?
I mean, it can be. Like, both my wife and myself had encounters with our grandparents after they passed, and I've mentioned it on this show recently, where, when my grandmother died, the night that she died, before I knew, I had a dream where we were in this magnificent marble garden. There was like all this white Italian marble everywhere. And there was just this luminous light. It was warm, and she was enveloped in light. I mean, she was like clothed in light, almost like an angelic appearance. We walked for what seemed like, countless hours, just talking about the times that we spent together, and how, that one day we will do these things again when I come to join her there. And I woke up from that dream being, that was a weird dream, and then as soon as I woke up, when I went into the kitchen to get coffee, I was told that she had died that night. And I mean, at that point, it was a little bit shocking to me, because it brought context to that, what I thought was simply just a weird dream, but it was one of those dreams where you couldn't shake it, and I always learned to pay attention to those. So was that healing to me? I guess to a certain degree, because it gave me some affirmation, not that I really needed it, because, I have a lot of faith. And so I'm content with some of the mystery that comes with life and death. And I know there's a certain reason for that, and I trust God's way of working through it. So maybe I was a bit undeserving of that experience. Maybe it should have gone to people that need it more than I do, since I didn't really need it, but I had it. And my wife had a similar one with both her grandparents, where they came to her, and basically, I guess she was walking outside, and this car drives up in her dream again, and both of her grandparents were in the car. I might be butchering this to some degree, because I don't remember all the details, but long story short, they basically said, goodbye, and, we love you, and you won't be seeing us again. And then they drove off, and that for her was a direct connection to sort of create closure and know that they'd be okay, but also knowing that once you cross over to that point, you typically don't come back. So again, it would have to be something that God wills. We are discouraged from communicating with the dead in Scripture for a reason. It's not so much because it's like some kind of profane thing, and necromancy is this evil act of Satanism or something. It has nothing to do with that. It has more to do with the fact that we're really supposed to not hold on to our attachments. We're supposed to more naturally go with the flow of this existence, and to do so with the acceptance and faith that, it all works as exactly as God wants it to work. And when we put our effort into searching after things, then it becomes a more unhealthy relationship with that call to trust that God sort of requires. There is nothing in your story to indicate to me that there would be any concern. At the very worst, now we're going to just talk just Christian, a Christian bishop, in a pastoral care situation. What I would say is, in pastoral terms, the worst case scenario for a person like your grandfather would be purgatory. At that point,
My dad.
Your dad. I'm sorry. Your
Yeah.
dad. I was thinking of my
No,
grandfather.
it's okay.
Um,
Yeah.
the best that you can do is to always pray for the dead, because you just don't know. You don't know who crosses over into the state of heaven, or who has more perfecting that is required there. And we know from the
Yeah.
teaching of the church that our prayers do indeed facilitate and help people to move on from purgatory. That's the grace that we ourselves can give them. There is nothing here to indicate that there would be any risk of hell, particularly since I heard you say, and I think you mentioned this before on Twitter, if I'm remembering the same story, that he had last rites, right? He had that. So
Yes. Yeah. Good memory. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I got him last rites. Yeah, and he had that, and my dad wasn't. He was very Catholic and very much had a relationship with God, and I haven't missed a day praying for him, not one day, and I take it really serious. Yeah, I'm hopeful of the same thing, that worst case scenario at worst, and I feel that in my gut that I wouldn't have to worry about anything other than, I'm not worried per se about anything like, negative.
right. No, yeah, and I don't think there's nothing here that would lead even to be any concern from a pastoral standpoint, because it seems like everything that could possibly be done right was done right, even right up to the way he lived his life, because the corporal works of mercy are definitely some of the most purifying actions that a person can take, and to do so completely freely, without any benefit to oneself, is always of the highest caliber of grace. I mean, that's the purest form of grace.
To do it and to say no to copious amounts of money to consult, because my dad is an expert in the field that he was in.
Yeah.
To do that and then say goodbye to, hey, $1 million, do you want to consult with us? That's another bonus. I'd never seen a man less in love with money and more in love with kind of the thrill and the happiness of mentorship. I've never met another person who will easily make that trade any day of the week. And my father definitely walked the walk in that regard.
I mean, that's the best that one could possibly attain to. Most don't do that and are still able to achieve to the perfection of the kingdom. So, from a purely pastoral point of view, there's nothing there that I would see of concern. And from a metaphysical point of view, the fact that you haven't had any direct encounter is a very good sign, because that's what one would expect from someone who has attained to that. There wouldn't be anything residual.
I felt him.
Go ahead.
I felt him in the car on the way to the hospital as he was dying.
Yeah.
When I was driving over, because I was racing to get there. And they said, "Come now." And if his heart stops again, we're not going to resuscitate. Yada yada. The words you dream you never hear.
Yeah. And
I felt something in the car. I felt like something was happening, and I couldn't put my finger on it. And then when I got there, obviously I learned that he had just passed. But that's the closest thing that I felt to any kind of. I just feel like if he could be here with me, he would. We loved each other, and we were very, maybe even codependent at some levels, which is why I kind of was curious about the spirits and moving on and communication. But in the end, I'm going to try to work on, I know it'll be a work in progress, but just to try to work on being more at ease with God's plan and some of the mysteries that this life holds and death holds, and just kind of strengthen my own. I think my dad would probably want me to just take some of the good that he did and strengthen myself and try my hardest. And so those are the things I'm going to try to concentrate on, and get good mentorship from people like you, and diversify my sources. And that's what I'm hopeful to do. And I really can't tell you guys enough. I know you hear it sometimes on Twitter, but what you've done has really been helpful to people like me.
Well, it
Just
means a
being
lot.
there.
I mean, it does. I probably don't realize it, honestly, because there's so much. For everyone that's like yourself, there's like, 1,000 to 10,000 thankless ones, and you obviously see the toxicity that occurs in Twitter, and. I mean, it does. It gets to a point of frustration, and also being a religious figure in the world that exists today is. I mean, not that it's ever been an easy job. It's never been an easy job. It wasn't an easy job in Jesus' time. Certainly, it's not much better now. But the fact is, it is sometimes weigh on you. When you don't hear it very often, it means a lot to hear what you said. And if I can leave you with anything, I would say that the best way to heal from this and to sort of come to terms with some of these things that you may be struggling with emotionally is to learn and regularly pray the office of the dead, not just for your father, but also for for all of those in what we call the condition of purgatory. And you've heard me talk. Purgatory is not a location; it's not a place you go. Purgatory is that state of where you're too perfect for dissipation. You have essentially received the grace that holds the cohesion of oneself together. You've earned your soul, if so to speak, but at the same time, you're not quite perfect enough to be able to enter into that state of union with God in the kingdom of heaven. And so therefore, there's still a little more work that needs to be done with grace, and the grace of those who pray for them is very helpful to facilitating that process. There is also an exchange that goes back and forth, a healing. And I can tell you there have been several saints in the church that have reported to have received encounters of people that were in purgatory that have been rescued from that through the prayers of those saints. And they had encounters with the dead where again, this is one of those times where God permits it, and the dead came to them and said, thank you, you've done this for me. And so I think that experience, the ministry to the dead, is a very important thing that really only Catholics and to a certain extent Orthodox understand. The rest of the Christian church almost ignores it entirely because they've fallen into this trap of thinking that if it's not God, that's the devil. You can't have ghosts, you can't have lost souls. That doesn't happen. And of course that is a real problem because it does happen, and we can help them. And if you're not helping them, then you're not actually doing your entire job as a Christian. So this is something I think you can do to help yourself to be able to, I think, not only overcome some of the I guess whatever unfinished business you feel you might have in regards to how to deal with this and integrate this, because I feel that there is some to you, at least on your end, that needs to be resolved.
There is.
Yeah, this is a way to do that.
Probably there is. I mean, he was the alpha and the omega of my of my life.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and a lot of this year, my dad died on February 28th. My mom gets coronavirus on March 27th after breaking her hip and going to a nursing home, nearly dies. I mean, and so everything's on my shoulders. So yeah, there's some unresolved feelings and issues, and I could use all the help I could get, I'm sure.
Well,
you're on the right track, man.
You are. I just, stay with that. And sometimes this is exactly how God strengthens our faith, by not giving us all the answers that we desire, but at the same time, directing us and leading us to explore ways in which we can better trust his plan for our lives, which is very mysterious and not always comfortable, and sometimes it's downright hard. But anyway, we've reached the end of the show, everyone. I want to thank all of you for calling in. I want to apologize for those of you who are on the line and we weren't able to get to your call. Please remember, we do this almost every week. Pay attention to social media for our next episode. I think it's next Tuesday. Don't quote me on that. I have to go check. But you can look at the schedule on Blog Talk Radio. It has our upcoming shows. And please plan to call, and call early. And if you call, the earlier you call, the better the chances that we'll be able to take you on. Sister Mary Joan, thank you so much for being with me tonight. It's always a pleasure to talk with you.
Thanks, Bishop. Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you. And to all of you in the chat, I know you probably had some questions too, but the show, it made it to the end. Next time, God bless. Take care. And we'll see you on Open Lines Part 4 next week. Take care.
Ninety seconds. 60 seconds. 10 seconds.